Is a potential U.S. war with Iran and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz actually a bold strategic move to counter China? Well, let's look at the data. During recent U.S.-Iran tensions, 97% of Iranian oil tankers went directly to China. So how do you starve an industrial giant without actually invading it? You cut off its oil supply. The U.S. recognized that China relies heavily on oil from nations like Venezuela and Iran. So the strategy plays out like this. First, if the U.S. were to remove Nicolás Maduro from power, Venezuelan oil to China would be cut off. The second target is Iran, where China gets a massive portion of its remaining oil supply. Interestingly, when Iran attempted to enforce a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, President Trump countered by putting a blockade on their blockade. Then something fascinating happened. As a result, hundreds of oil tankers started turning to the U.S. for their oil. Indirectly, this drives up our petrodollar profits and brings a lot more revenue into the country. Why would the United States ever want the world's most critical oil choke point shut down? The answer is simple. Total, undeniable energy dominance, a chess move by the Trump administration. Imagine the scenario. Tensions boil over and the strait is blockaded. Instantly, 20% of the world's oil supply is trapped. Right now, in this scenario, there are 121 massive oil tankers stranded outside the Persian Gulf. They are empty, their contracts are voided, and their buyers in Europe and Asia are panicking. So, where do hundreds of desperate multi-million-dollar tankers go when the Middle Eastern tap runs dry? Well, they pivot west. They turn to the only players left on the board with the raw capacity to keep the world's engines running. The United States made a bold move in the history of geopolitics. Over the last decade, the U.S. quietly transformed into an energy superpower. They have the reserves, the extraction technology, and the export terminals. When Hormuz closes, American crude isn't just an option. It becomes the most sought-after commodity on Earth. Prices surge and billions of dollars flow directly into the U.S. economy. But what about Venezuela? How does a heavily sanctioned nation like Venezuela fit into an American master plan? Because the U.S. controls the sanctions dial. By selectively easing restrictions on Venezuelan heavy crude, the U.S. effectively orchestrates the flow of South American oil to global markets. They manage the global price shock just enough to keep allies from collapsing while simultaneously drawing Venezuela away from Eastern influence and forcing them to play by American rules. It is a brutal, high-stakes gambit. By allowing the Middle East to lock itself down, the U.S. flips the entire global energy map. The 121 tankers don't just buy oil, they buy American leverage. It's no longer about keeping the peace in the desert. It's about proving that when the old system breaks, the house always wins. What's a blockade, and what did Trump actually do? Think of a blockade like putting a bouncer at a door. Trump sent the U.S. Navy to the Strait of Hormuz and said, no ship that comes from an Iranian port gets through. Any ship that paid Iran a toll to pass also getting stopped. He even warned, Iranian ships that come near the blockade will be immediately eliminated. That's a big deal. Experts literally called it an act of war. But how does the US even know which ships came from Iran? Ships are huge and there are thousands of them. This is where it gets wild. They're using AI. Maritime artificial intelligence software platforms track every single ship using satellite radar that can see vessels even when they turn off their GPS trackers. The AI doesn't just count ships. It reads behavior. It cross-references satellite imagery, automatic identification system transponder signals, historical voyage patterns, port call records, flag registrations, cargo manifests, and corporate ownership networks, then assigns each vessel a risk profile in real time. As in the blockade's launch, the platform was already flagging that Iranian oil exports remain structurally active, with approximately 157.7 million barrels on water, and 97.6% of them directed toward China. That number, 97.6% heading to China, is the most important data point in this entire conflict. It is the number that explains everything. The AI, in other words, is not broadly watching the sea. It is watching a pipeline. A covered, floating pipeline of sanctioned crude that runs from Iranian ports to Chinese refineries. The Strait of Hormuz blockade, operationally targeted at ships from Iranian ports, is in functional terms a targeted interdiction of China's oil discount supply chain. So is choking China the main intention behind these global moves? Not entirely, but it is the ultimate strategic byproduct. In geopolitics, actions rarely have just one motive. For the US administration, the immediate goals are clear: permanently dismantle Iran's nuclear ambitions and assert dominance in the Western Hemisphere by removing Maduro. How exactly does this strategy devastate Beijing's economy? It comes down to a massive price shock and the loss of a critical energy buffer. China's massive economy runs on cheap energy. But right now, the Middle Eastern conflict and the Strait of Hormuz severely restricted global crude benchmarks have surged past $130 to $140 per barrel. So where does that leave China's energy supply pipeline completely stripped of its cheapest options? By cutting off the Venezuelan supply in January and bottlenecking the Iranian supply in April, the US has effectively cornered Beijing. Instead of relying on sanctioned discounts, China is now forced to buy energy on the open market at these massively inflated wartime prices. So does China have any backup options left on the table? Well, it has only one, and it comes with a heavy political cost. The only major sanctioned discount left for China is Russia. And while it keeps the lights on, this sole dependence gives Moscow an incredibly uncomfortable amount of leverage over Beijing. But how will the US actually capture or block a foreign-flagged oil tanker? And how will it enforce a blockade when a geopolitical chess game suddenly escalates into a kinetic military operation? In this scenario, the United States will enforce a strict blockade on Iranian oil. This is oil that China will have explicitly placed under its protection. This operation will serve as the climax of a weeks-long standoff, rooted in the US government's aggressive new complete blockade of Iranian exports. The target will be some rusting 10-year-old tanker identified by US intelligence as part of the Shadow Fleet, a clandestine network of vessels used by China and Iran to transport illicit oil and bypass global sanctions. Let's consider this scenario. An oil tanker will be intercepted by the US Navy near the Strait of Hormuz. When the captain refuses to stop, shuts off the ship's transponder, and flees into the open Pacific Ocean, the US will dispatch its forces, sparking a grueling pursuit of more than 5,000 miles. If you're looking to upgrade your digital defense system, you need to check out this military-grade VPN. Think of Surfshark VPN as your frontline defense. It scans and detects threats, alerting you to thousands of dangerous emails. Beyond that, it includes a robust antivirus software to shield your devices from viruses, malware, and tracking by ads, bots, or third parties. Finally, with Surfshark VPN, a single subscription covers not just you, but also your friends or even your entire city if you wanted. Go to our link surfshark.com/AITele. By buying through the promo link, you will get 4 extra months free, assured by a 30-day money-back guarantee. So what tactics and deception will the tanker's crew follow? If this is an Iranian oil tanker, the crew will frantically attempt to change the ship's legal identity on the move to make it untouchable. They will repaint the hull, rename the ship to Chinese or Russian, and raise the respective flag. As the tanker steams toward the strategic gap between the Middle East and the Indian Ocean. To complicate matters further, Chinese warships will operate in the vicinity, creating a defensive screen. This will force American commanders to proceed with extreme caution, knowing that one wrong move could spark an accidental naval war. Despite the silent threat lurking below, the US will give the green light to seize the vessel. Their strategy will be bold: neutralize the Chinese submarine not with torpedoes, but with overwhelming air superiority. Leading the surface chase will be the USS Monroe, a Legend-class cutter that will have stalked the Iranian-Chinese vessel for weeks through brutal ocean swells. But before the US Navy can make its move, the sky will need to be secured. US Navy P-8 Poseidon will swarm the sector, dropping a net of sonobuoys to track the Chinese sub's every movement, while KC-135 Strato tankers will keep the surveillance dragnet aloft 24/7. The Air Force will join the hunt, deploying electronic warfare assets to strip Chinese communications bare. The P-8s will effectively box out the submarine, signaling clearly that any aggression will guarantee its immediate destruction. With the underwater threat pinned down, the US surface ship will finally close the distance. Because the Pacific seas will be too violent for small boarding boats, the American operators will go vertical. In a precision assault, special operations teams will fast rope from hovering helicopters directly onto the tanker's deck. Within minutes, they will secure the bridge, cut the engines, and raise the American flag. This is when the oil tanker will be theirs and blockade is enforced. We make original videos from scratch and animated by humans, so please subscribe to not miss a beat.